few days ago I reviewed the Umidigi S5 Pro. While I still like this device and it did perform quite well, I will agree that the regular retail price is a little bit too much, and the fact that Umidigi has not got back to me in regards to software updates, I think that is a bit of a deal breaker. But if you can find this on sale, it's still a reasonably good device. You got to look at the bigger picture with the battery capacity as well. If you want a phone to last all day, this will do it. I have got Hypercam installed, and I also tried several different Gcam ports to see if I could get one working on here, and unfortunately none of them work. Well, one works, but you can only do video, and we can't do 60 FPS or 4K. So that's where we're at with this one. I think a lot of people were expecting me to rip this apart in my original review, but I gave it a positive one. But I do understand where a lot of people are coming from with the regular retail price and all that sort of thing. It's still a reasonable device. It still has a lot of good things going for it, but enough of that. Let's tear this thing down. Now I know Umidigi has already done a very quick teardown on this phone, but my teardown is gonna also serve as an update from my original video. Taking the case off the S5 Pro, we can see the curved glass as well as the pop-up camera up here too. Then coming to the rear cameras, I wanted to see if we can test that depth sensor and see if it actually does any depth sensing per se. We will also try investigating this extra hole here to see what that is. So I don't burn my mouse mat, I'll just put this box down here just in case. Taking the SIM tray out should be easy enough, except now it doesn't eject itself, so you kind of just have to pull the tray out with the SIM tool, if that makes any sense. Getting inside the S5 Pro seems easy enough with just enough heat from my heat gun along the edges. I can use a suction cup and a pry tool to just get underneath the glass. I was anticipating a bit of a fight to open this up, but all went better than expected, when my pry tool just slipped right through the adhesive. Using a piece of cardstock, I'll then be able to slice along the edges to get through the adhesive, which as we can see here is not too much. You probably don't need any heat at all to get inside of this phone since the adhesive is very weak. A tiny bit of sweat may kill this phone if it's looked at the wrong way. The rear glass panel is, well, glass, and I thought a clear mod would look nice, but I'll take that back I think. Setting the panel to the side, you can see the pop-up camera's flex ribbon just sort of dangling about here in the middle of the NFC pad. Now I can focus on the bottom of the phone. 8 Phillips head screws hold down this piece of plastic which comes off fairly easy. Inside is a fairly large loudspeaker, but unfortunately there's no traces of a foam ball pit for ants. Sorry folks. You can see the holes in the frame for the loudspeaker. It doesn't have any mesh or anything over that, which if this was in a sweaty pocket, it will get inside fairly easy. The subboard has a flex connector for the main board, an antenna wire, the Type-C USB port, and the microphone. It also has the underscreen fingerprint sensor, which we can get a look at by unclipping this little latch and lifting it out. With some gentle persuasion, we have it out, and this is it. Nothing too special here to be fairly honest. But doing a tribute to jerry-rig everything, I'll shine the torch from my S10 through the OLED panel so you can see the cutout for the sensor. Unclipping the flex ribbon and the antenna wire, I can take out the single screw holding it down to the frame and have a closer look at that subboard. The Type-C port is soldered onto this board and does not have a rubber ring around it to protect it from any liquids, so be careful with this one. The SIM and SD card area is located on this board, so if one single thing went wrong with this board, you would unfortunately have to likely replace the whole entire thing. You can also see the coin-style vibration motor and the rear of the OLED panel just here. Now that I'm done with this area, I'll put it all back into place and we can now move up to the top. There's 9 screws holding this top plastic piece on. One has a little warranty sticker on top, which of course we'll be voiding completely. Once all of the screws are removed, we can take the plastic piece off and get a first look at the motherboard. But first, let's check out that plastic piece. You can see the glass covering all the camera lenses on the plastic as well. Taking this piece away reveals it's just another microphone, but during the video test it wasn't recording in stereo, so not sure what this extra one does. The other piece is just the flash on the plastic that communicates with the motherboard. Placing that aside, we'll have a look at the pop-up camera and its mechanism, which all seems to be a fairly basic one. You can see it working here as normal. Trying to wiggle it around appears to be fairly solid, which is a good thing. You can push the camera back into the phone and the motor will retract it back to its original position. but if we try and push it up manually, we can do so, but effectively doing it this way bypasses the motor from working, so the camera just remains popped up and springy until we reset the positioning of the motor. Which makes it all work again. According to Umidigi, this motor has been tested 300,000 times. Hopefully this is true. Now down to the battery. Usually I'm good with a bit of adhesive, but in this case there's not a lot. Disconnecting the battery connector from the mainboard and pulling out the plastic tab, the battery just sort of falls out. This plastic piece with just a few pieces of weak adhesive is all that's holding it down into place. We can have a look at the massive 4680 mAh battery in the S5 Pro, which still gets a thumbs up from me. While this phone may not be super solid, it still has a decent battery in it. Back to the motherboard, there's something under this piece of tape that I never ended up going back to look at. I'll start disconnecting the flex ribbons to prepare to remove the motherboard. And we will also need to take the pop-up camera and motor out as well. There's 2 screws holding a plate down over the flex ribbon, 2 screws holding the motor down to the camera, 2 holding the motor down to the frame, and then 1 under the camera itself to hold it down. This little metal thing secures the flex ribbon into place and is quite important, so I'll set this off to the side. Taking all these out and disconnecting the flex ribbon from the motherboard, I can now try and remove it all. As I tried prying out the motor and realised it was snagging on something, it took me a bit of time afterwards to work out that there were contacts on the motor that connect with the back of the motherboard. I am pretty lucky that I didn't tear this right off. We can, however, pop the selfie camera out at the top of the phone to get a better look at it. So far, it looks nothing special with no extras like a flash or anything like that on it. Taking the glass cover off gives us a look at the camera, which has no optical image stabilization. I'll put this to the side and go back to the motherboard. 2 screws hold down the motherboard, and in order to remove the board, we also need to disconnect the side keys from it, just like a little weapon. The ultra-wide camera is held down to the frame with some adhesive, so I'll have to disconnect this in order to pull out the motherboard, which comes out fairly easy. This gives us a look at the frame, the few areas that have thermal paste, the manufacturing date, and the contacts for the motor. You can see all of the areas on the back of the motherboard here where all the thermal paste is applied. And each of these areas does come in contact with the frame. All looks fairly usual in this regards, but that heat pipe is definitely needing to be investigated. I won't remove the motor as I know what's going on with it, so we'll move on. Back to the motherboard, we have our quad camera setup. One thing I noticed with the cameras is that the macro camera and the depth cameras look exactly the same, but that could be just me. There's these massive gold contacts here for the loudspeaker. You can see the thermal paste all over my gloves. It's fairly dry, but at least there's some present. The main 48 megapixel camera does not have optical image stabilization, and neither does the 16 megapixel ultra wide one. Each camera is connected separately, with the depth, macro and ultra wide all connected to the top of the board, and the 48 megapixel one being connected underneath the board. Shining a light through the top of the phone itself shows the location of the front sensors, which are just located here next to the earpiece. The earpiece itself could be used as a secondary speaker, but it's just used for the standard loudspeaker stuff. I really wish Umidigi would have implemented a dual speaker setup, but it is what it is. The earpiece is stuck down with a bit of adhesive and is easy to place back in. Now it's time to have a look at our PC grade liquid cooling that Umidigi says on their website. And you actually seen a very quick glimpse of the heatsink in all its glory in the official Umidigi Teardown video. And I do realise in this case that the heat pipe picture on the site is just advertising, but some may still believe it does have quite a big heat pipe inside, which, as you can see here, it doesn't. I'm sure that this would help with some heat dissipation, but how much is up for a debate. Pulling the tiny piece of copper out through a small gap in the frame reveals how thin it really is. The heat pipe is also resting on some tape right on the back of the OLED panel, which may not be good in the long run. Trying to open up that tiny heat pipe proved to be a pain, but there is the most tiniest bit of wick in there. Using a small screwdriver to pull it out, there's not a lot in there. I wasn't expecting a waterfall of liquid to splash out, but there you go. It really does make me think that this toothpick may be better for cooling than this is. Just stopping for a bit to have a look over the mostly disassembled phone, you can see the main flex ribbon has Umidigi printed on it, and that the screen seems to be made by a company called Visionox. Never heard of them before. I'll also have to apply a bit more adhesive on the frame for the battery later on. I can put the phone back together, which should seem easy enough, starting by putting the motherboard back into place and connecting up all the flex ribbons and the single antenna wire. I put the 2 screws back in for the motherboard, but it turns out I put them in the wrong location. I'll fix this later on. Sliding the pop-up camera in, I had a bit of trouble with all of this since the motor needs to be in place and I had already put all the screws back in. If all the screws are off the motor, you can slide the pop-up camera in place and have it line up with the 2 screw points on the motor. Once that's done, I can go ahead and screw all the other screws back in. I'll then connect up the camera back to the motherboard. I'll also grab that metal tab that goes over the flex ribbon and screw that back down. This whole process is quite finicky to do, but just take your time, no rush. Placing the battery into place and connecting it back up, I wanted to make sure I didn't kill the phone or the pop-up camera. So far so good. And opening the camera up shows that it's all still working. Well done me. I went and placed the top plastic on and started to screw everything down until I realised 2 of them weren't going back in, and that's because I placed the motherboard screws in the wrong location. So I'll fix that up now and then put the plastic back down again. Now the battery at this point will basically just be held down by hopes and dreams, so to remedy this, I'll stick some super cheap adhesive in here, just like so. Much better. No need for any plastic pull tabs now. I'll rip off the leftover adhesive off the back glass panel and just situate it down on the phone. I'll reapply adhesive off camera, but if I just put it back in its case, it won't matter much anyways. Plus at this point, I'm not done with this phone just yet. So it seems on this channel I've had many issues with phones and depth sensors, and this phone just adds to the list. When testing it, I couldn't get a true bokeh or portrait effect. Only the software blur, which is just a blurry circle added around whatever you are taking a photo of. So let's block that camera off with some tape and see what happens. And what do you know? Nothing changes. With 4 cameras on this and 3 of them do different things, the depth sensor is the odd one out here. And testing out other features with this camera blocked off, all seem to work still. The software blur still present. This fake portrait mode is on most devices I have tested. It seems to be a common thing with clones to give the illusion that an extra dud camera is actually doing something. But since this is not a clone, it is quite sketchy. Let's take it one step further by disconnecting the depth sensor from the motherboard so we can see if any errors pop up or if the depth sensor complains, and the result? Nothing at all. Still the software blur. I thought this may be pulling another Oukatel by having a camera with a black dot instead of a sensor, so I casually went ahead and do what you were meant to do and just rip the actual lens off the small flex ribbon with the sensor integrated onto it. But as we can see here, there is actually a sensor. This is definitely not the macro camera, as I made sure I knew which one to destroy first. So I have no idea what purpose this sensor actually serves. And I'll also just casually place the bare sensor back into the phone. It's completely fine. Another thing also happened, the fingerprint sensor doesn't work anymore. I checked over it to make sure I didn't damage it, and it's all intact. There's no fingerprints or smudges in the way, it just refuses to work. So if you did need to replace your subboard in this phone, chances are you may damage the sensor in the end. It all seems pretty sketchy at this point in time. With the phone back together, I can re-evaluate everything that's happened. It's still a good phone, but its regular retail price is way too much. Umidigi still hasn't responded to any updates, and they haven't done anything with the Power 3 either in that regards. The depth sensor is just a waste of space, and they could have fit a headphone jack in this unit, but they chose not to. It makes me go back and think how the Power 3 was a more ideal device than the S5 Pro, but even the Power 3 has its fair share of problems. I've decided I'm not going to be reviewing any more Umidigi products from now on, and will be focusing on what I am good at. Cheapo stuff. I hope Umidigi does step up their game in the future, but with the lack of support and some false advertising thrown in the mix, I sort of regret my overly positive review. As I said, it's still a good phone with some good features, but you might want to pick this up when it's been heavily reduced. Feel free to come and hang out with me and the lads on Discord. Thanks a ton for watching, and I'll see you around. I really love doing these cheapo jerry-rig everything videos, and I don't mean any disrespect to him at all. I'm just a fan who loves these videos. So, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this one for what it was. Take care, stay safe, and of course, be good people.